true. Okay. Yeah.
So I guess we're live.
Cool. Welcome here, Sahar.
Thanks.
Awesome to have you here. And I realize you just finished the Women in Data Science conference, right? What was that about?
Yeah, so on Tuesday we had Women in Data Science Stockholm conference. It was a virtual event. It's an event that is annual, and it's based on an initiative started by Stanford 5 years ago to inspire women in the field of data science, AI, and machine learning, and to also build a community and grow people in this path, especially like focusing on women. And we started in Stockholm 3 years ago, and we had our first event in 2018. And like every year, it started growing, and this year,
Corona year.
Yeah, Corona hit us. So just like a few days before the event, we had to cancel it. It was supposed to be on Friday the 13th of March.
In March,
yeah.
And that was right when Corona started to
exactly
explode a bit.
Yeah.
And previously we had like physical conferences in Stockholm.
We had physical conferences. I mean, it brought like a lot of challenges to find out what is a good way of having good content, engaging conversations, and like having networking happening also for women, but also meant like a lot of people outside of Stockholm could join, not just Sweden but also like around the world. Which was super nice. And we are really, I mean, I have a really high bar of like, what we put out. I mean, my co-organizers as well, but I think we feel quite content with the event.
So it just finished, was it on Tuesday now?
Yeah, it was Tuesday. So we had around 220 people that attended and stayed for the whole event. And we had 3 invited speakers, very good experts talking about human-computer interaction. We had about machine learning operation, and we had talk about advanced analytics and game theory. Then we had 6 talks, lightning talks from women in the field that they had 5 minutes explaining about how infrastructure in the problem in their domain works from different companies. And we also had a mingle, a virtual mingle.
A virtual mingle? How does that work?
How did that work?
So so last week I attended the Rexis conference where they used a new platform, Gather.town.
Gather.town?
Yeah, and it's a 2D pixeled environment, and you have a virtual avatar, and then you can build conference rooms, you can build a bar, and you can have a lot of like virtual elements that to interact with. And it's super nice because you have audio and video, and then if you move from people away, their video is fading and their audio fading. If you are close, you can locate people and move to them, and then there are designated areas so that no one else can hear you.
So people are sitting behind web cameras, and you can see the one close to you in this virtual. So
like you just connect. So like as an organizer, we built like one environment, and then you just join that environment with your microphone and your camera on, and then if you can move with arrow keys, and if you are like your avatars are close to each other, so you can talk to each other and hear each other
and see each other
as well. Yeah. So it was a very interesting experiment, and I think people had some fun. Yeah.
So it was positive, or I mean, obviously it's a lot of differences from a physical conference, but what were your expectations, and how did it actually turn out, you'd say?
So I think in the past 6 months, I attended a few conferences. So like few days conferences, like more scientific ones, or like, 1 day conferences or meetups. And many of them, they are not engaging. Many of them, they require you as a speaker to record yourself, and then like you have, for instance, like just the Q&A that is interactive, or even the Q&A sometimes is just like a text. And the mingle is not really interactive. But I think this one probably was the best that I've seen. But also, like, you know, I should not talk about our own event and say it was like the best, but I think it was a good platform to try out. It's quite new. I don't know how they scale, but we enjoyed the experiment.
Maybe that's the point. When we do something virtual like this, it has to be some fun to it, or something to break the ice. What do you think, going into a virtual event, my experience has been also that we know it's also up to who is participating to transfer the conference behavior onto a virtual platform. So it's actually a lot of responsibility on how you use the platform. I've seen quite a few conferences having quite good service, but we're not really using it as participants. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, the other good conference that I attended was Foundation of Games. And like, you know, in that domain, people in general are very interactive. They like to have conversations. It's a smaller community, but it's a very fun community to work with. And then you could see, like, it was with Discord and it was Zoom, but you could see people how much they are engaged. They give comment. They like share things with each other. But while, like, you know, you go to another conference, it's like the style is very formal and everyone is busy, so they zone in to the conference and zone out, and they are not as engaged. So and it could be Zoom or whatever technology used in both of them, but the experience becomes quite different based on what the community does with it. Yeah. So I've attended 2 conferences, both of them using Hova and Zoom. So similar setup. But one of them was very interactive, and the other one wasn't at all. Yeah. Do you think, as a conference producer, because now you've been on this side, what are the small tricks and tips that you can do using the same technology, but essentially getting the movement, getting the interaction happening? What's your best trick? I think we need to iterate quite a lot to succeed, so we haven't reached there yet. But what we did, though, I have to say that we did a test run. So we had a meetup during summer, so that we learned quite a lot from that. And then we planned this event according to that one. So like the interaction piece was missing, and we learned that it should be there. One of the things that I've also learned to like secondhand information is that like there is also a risk of people bullying each other in the chats. So like it's we decided to go for a webinar format because we wanted to, like, sometimes you know that it's a small community, you know who is joining, then it's like you feel more comfortable to take the risk of like having an open platform, but sometimes it's not possible, and in this case we decided to go for a webinar. But then like our speakers had some engagement elements. And we always also have a poll in our event so that like participants can tell about themselves, give us some input. I think one thing that is super important is also to communicate, like send out to participants, like here's how you can dial in, here are like the platform that we are going to use. Giving instructions how to behave. Exactly. So instructions is super key. And then, during the event, I think again, like each of the speakers, if they have some element of interaction, asking a question and see what people write, for instance, in the chat. That's nice. That gives you at least some point of I'm there. There are small means to have some different types of questions, and what do you call it when you have some sort of mentometer? You have something to voting systems. They are quite so small things like this. The experience changes quite a bit, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a learning experience for everyone. So I would say it takes like a year. That to have this attempt at least once, and then you know what you do better next time. And a lot of companies are starting building new things new platforms that we can use.
So speaking about the future, what do you think about women in data science 1 year from now, or when the corona pandemic starting to pan out a bit and starting to return a bit to normal? Do you think it will go back basically to the old style or traditional style of conferences?
I think we are missing this touch of like having like person-to-person interaction. Yeah. So we would love to go back to a normal situation, but like I think at this point it's very unclear because this next event is going to be in March.
What do you think, like 3 years ahead, assume we have vaccines for everything and we have the pandemic under control?
So there's a couple of things. I think I really like to have this local interaction so people can meet. Like I'm looking for a mentor, so I want to meet this person. It's just like you get you share emotions. You figure out like the pain of people. You figure out that I can have more coffee with this person and like learn more. So that I really miss, and I would like to have that and continue having that. But the other aspect is that opportunities. So I think, in my opinion, having everything centralized in Stockholm is not fair. Like, if you have someone super interested that can't attend to flight from Luleå for a one-day conference, why not being able to join virtually? Yeah. So maybe a mix of the two would be a good thing to have. I mean, I'm complaining about conferences that I attended, but like a lot of these conferences I couldn't have attended if it wasn't virtual, right?
So we are maybe going to something as a hybrid of some kind.
I'm hoping for that.
I like a hybrid.
Yeah, I mean it could be a way, because conference can also be something that only a very few top people can go to, and perhaps by having a more easy to access type of conference, more people can simply enjoy and learn more by this. Right?
There is another dimension, and it's the cost. So like this
or producing or attending or
attending.
Yeah.
Well, I mean it's both, but I think I would say attending. So like we have conferences that their cost is like $1,000. Yeah. And I mean, if you are coming from a startup, for instance, like you can't really attend those conferences, even for the sake of experience. So I would argue for that. That would reduce the cost. But I just wanted, because you asked about women in data science and like what I see in a year. I mean, I forgot to say that we have the conference that we are organizing with my super awesome co-organizers. We also we have this group, Women in Data Science Sweden group, which we are quite active in Facebook.
That's a Facebook group, right?
But we also have a LinkedIn group, and we have a Twitter account. We do some other initiatives, so we are trying to grow the community. So we have been running some meetups. We have been also planning to have a mentorship program. And a book reading club and a few of these initiatives, so hopefully that we can support women in the field to grow further.
And what made you passionate about driving this community or be part of this community? What's important for you?
So this started with I think it was, so I was attending Women in Tech conference, and then I met Galina, one of my co-organizers there, and we started talking together as we feel that we don't have our own community because we were coming from a technical background and data and AI, and we felt like there is a gap, and we don't find women in the field that much in Sweden. And she attended Women in Data Science in London. And then she told me, hey, listen, there is such a thing, should we try that? And we said, let's start it. And then Rebecca joined. We started the first year. And then Tonya and Karin joined us.
So do you have a mission statement for the Stockholm chapter?
Yeah, so our mission is to, I don't remember exactly, but as I was saying, it's around we want to inspire and grow this community. So that's the most important goal we have.
So lots of interesting topics here, like how to attract talents and,
we will come back to circle back to several of these topics, but maybe we should introduce Sahar properly. Who would you like to tell who is Sahar?
How far back should I go?
Up to you.
Maybe I can start from who I am now. So I am AI research lead at King. I joined King a year and a half ago, and so I've been.
And if there are a few people that don't know what King is, can you just so we can give a larger introduction later, but just a very brief one. What is really King?
King is a gaming company focused on casual games, especially in mobile domain. Many people know King for Candy Crush.
Yes.
But there are also a lot of other games, and we keep continuing working on new games.
So you joined King in 2019? 19.
Yeah. So King is a Swedish company, and we like the main Candy franchises are also like Candy Crush Saga and Candy Crush Soda are based in Stockholm, so are the teams that I'm mostly interacting with. And King was acquired by Activision Blizzard a few years ago. So we are part of Activision Blizzard King.
So before we go more into what King is doing and how AI works and how they use data and everything, just perhaps a bit more, what did you do before King as well?
Okay, here's what I asked, how back I should go. So I've studied computer science. I'm originally from Iran. I did my bachelor and master in Iran in computer science. Moved for my PhD to Sweden, did my PhD in Applied Autonomous Sensor System Lab in Örebro. In the past 8 years and a half, I've been working in industry. So I first, back in 2012, started working in a startup, Oculus AI, working on computer vision and information retrieval. And then the company got acquired in 2013 by Meltwater, and I joined Meltwater. So we started the tech office in Stockholm. It was only sale and marketing back then in Stockholm. And there I worked for 3 years on natural language processing and information retrieval. I organized Stockholm NLP meetups back then. Then I felt like I would like to work with machine learning that is reaching to consumer. So I joined Spotify where we met.
Yeah.
I worked at Spotify for 2 years and a half as a data scientist. And after that, I left for a startup, Cluster One, American company. And which I was working remote, by the way, so I was used to working remote from there.
You didn't have a Stockholm office at the time?
No, I was the only one from Stockholm. And then I was there for 8 months, and we decided not to continue with the company, and I moved to King.
Cool. And what does Cluster One do, very briefly?
I mean, the company doesn't exist at the moment, but well, we were building a distributed deep learning platform. So we had two parts. One was like building the platform and infrastructure as a service, and the other part was also like research and consulting as a researcher to companies. And so we were working from with different companies from different domains, and the goal was to build an end-to-end system that you don't have to go with as a machine learning researcher, you don't have to go to a lot of engineering details if you want to test out and iterate about your model.
And just for all the techie people listening to this, how do you do distributed machine learning training?
Okay, so when we say distributed, you can think about distributed in different ways. One is that, let's say you want to run an experiment and you want to have 5 trials. So you can distribute those 5 trials, right? That was like, a usual thing that like in the past was happening with the tech, right? Then you can distribute a model, you can distribute data. Distributing model means that like you have a huge network, let's say you want to put in a CPU and like it doesn't fit, so you distribute the infrastructure, different layers are in different...
You split the model in different parts.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have distributed data, which is what our focus was on, where the idea is that you can batch your data in different ways to feed it to your model. And you also need a strategy to aggregate those information. And yeah, this is more or less where we were focusing on distributed deep learning.
And that was with TensorFlow or PyTorch or whatever?
So we were supporting a lot of different libraries and packages. So we were focused on TensorFlow, but we were using PyTorch, Keras. So back then, TensorFlow and Keras had more differences. Cafe, Chain. I'm missing one, but one more.
So given today's situation with all the libraries, if someone wants to do distributed training, let's say model parallel, let's say the normal data parallel thing instead, what would you recommend them to use? What do you think works the best today?
You're asking tricky questions. I think first of all you need to see if you really need the distributed training because
but King I guess does quite often, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when we get to research, yes, but not necessarily in production. You don't really need we don't have like a super complex model that requires, or we have enough resources that you don't need to do like distributed deep learning. But for most of the research that we do, we need that. So I think the common go-to is now GPU. And TensorFlow has good packages to just try out and do distributed training. I think
is it that easy really?
I think, okay, so that's what I wanted to say next. It's like, but the devil is in the details. Yeah. So the thing is that, at least in my experience, for instance, we worked with a company that they were benchmarking our platform and they said that, well, I'm using only one core and everything works better than when I'm using multiple cores. And we had to do a lot of research and like figuring out like, why. And what we learned is that like, the setup that they have, first of all, like you need to spend a lot of time of like about the nature of the problem you are trying to solve, nature of your data, the model that you are going to use. And then the other thing was that, so for instance, like the batch size is an important factor when you want to have a distributed deep learning. And that was not set properly. And a few other things. So like
it's not, devil is in the detail, as you say. Yeah.
I mean, trying it out is easy, I would say. It's tons of libraries and in like YouTube videos to just look and try out. But getting it right for like a production work, I would say it's we get to the details.
So it sounds like Sahar is a very techie person as well and a data science expert, right? And before we move on, you have some other passions, right? Women in data science, I guess, is one.
Yeah.
Any other like passions that people don't know about you?
Techie or non-techie?
Non-techie is fine.
Both.
Yeah.
I think, I used to, I injured myself, so I'm not playing as much, but I used to play volleyball quite a lot. I still do. So we have a ball in our car that every time, a volleyball ball that we just, So if we go somewhere that we can try, so I play volleyball a bit. That's my passion outside. If I get time, I used to do some calligraphy. Of course, also like reading some books, watching some series. You asked about techie things. I think I like to learn new things. So I keep just like, exploring and trying out new things. I also have a passion for physics.
Interesting.
I was going for physics before starting computer science, but it's just like a dice of.
Why we went left or right?
Yeah.
You said dice.
Well, I mean, I attended a nationwide entrance exam back then. It was like quite intense thing in Iran, and I just wanted to study physics in one particular university, and I think like I was in borderline for that university. And then I was like, okay, I want to do physics, but I also like complex systems, and I like simulation in physics. So, and I like analytics thinking and like algorithms. So then I learned about computer science and moved to computer science.
And a specific part of physics otherwise that you were extra interested in? I
was doing a lot of experimental physics, and when I was in high school, so I was attending like student conferences. So I like to understand the phenomenon, so experimental physics, a bit of neuroscience, which is like between physics and computer and math. So yeah, I
was always hoping you're going to say quantum mechanics as well. Let's skip that for now.
Well, yeah, that was a long time ago. So quantum mechanics maybe now.
Maybe.
But we skipped over your PhD perhaps a bit too quickly as well. If you were to describe it still, how would you describe the focus that you had in your PhD?
Yeah, I think I was just saying like my PhD probably was not like the normal, usual way of doing PhD. So my PhD topic was on mobile robot olfaction. The full name is like statistical gas distribution modeling and sensor planning. But if I want to explain it simple, this was part of an EU project where like a few universities and companies working together on gas distribution modelings and like decision making platforms for in case of like incidents that gas is involved. There I was applying machine learning to estimate gas distribution where the environment is dynamic, so you have like wind, for instance, and you have like a sparse measurements of gas, and then also planning where to acquire the next sample, which is the most informative one, given like the target that you have. For instance, if you want to know the source or if you want to know the concentration, you might have a different strategy. So you do a multi-objective optimization.
Yeah, and connected perhaps to active learning or finding the next point to train.
Yeah, I think back then I didn't think of I didn't know the name of active learning, but I think it's connected. But talking about my journey of PhD.
Yeah, please.
So I started in 2009 doing my PhD, and so my funding was a 3 years funding. So back then PhD in Sweden was 3 years planned. For a period.
Yeah, licentiate, you mean?
No, for a period. So in UK, in Netherlands, in France still does that. So it was an EU thing. A lot of fundings were planned for 3 years.
Yeah, but the normal Swedish one is not, right?
So back then in Örebro was 3 years. In, for instance, KTH was 4 years.
Yeah.
I think around 2012 or 13 this changed. So now it's like 4 years, and then you have 20% of teaching. So back then was 3 years and 20% of teaching.
Sounds a bit strange to me, but okay, I'll leave it at that. But
so you had your courses from your master that was counted. So you didn't take the 1 year of.
I see. You can include some of the masterwork.
Exactly. So my funding was finished after 3 years, and I was like, okay, I don't think what I have is enough. You are never satisfied with what you have, right? So and then I was like, okay, maybe I need to start working, and while working, I will finish my PhD. And then I started working, and then you have this ramping up times of working, and then you get to know your work and new things. Then moved to the next company, and I was never happy with this is. I feel like I need to do more and more. So it took me, I think, a couple of years to get in peace with myself that, listen, this is enough. And it was maybe because, also a paper that we submitted during, so I was doing my work and I was also writing my papers and so on. So I got very good positive feedbacks on the paper. And I was like, oh, this is really enough. So, and I finished 2017. So, so it was not a smooth journey.
But
the
you
last
worked
year.
during the time, so
because
that's normal, I guess.
it shows also there are different ways of doing a PhD.
Yeah, exactly.
That you don't, straight out of school in parallel when you're working.
Yeah.
So I think all ways are good.
Yeah.
But you had some really popular papers as well. I think one of the top one is this Kavosh paper, or is?
Yeah, that's from my master's studies. So I've done, I think, my journey in computer science has been quite going different applications. So in my bachelor, I was doing distributed AI. My master, I worked on computational biology. And the paper Kavosh is about a work that we did on pattern finding. So it's so you have protein-protein interaction networks. So you can define how proteins interact with each other in a living body as a network, and it's basically is a graph, right? So then you can have if the idea is that there are subgraphs or we call it motif that are responsible for certain functions. And this pattern consists if you go from one living body to another one. So
it's a network of proteins? How
exactly.
How they are connected to each other?
Yeah, how they interact with each other. So you have this graph of network of proteins, and the goal was to find an efficient way that you can find the subgraphs or motifs. And the thing is that...
And what is a motif, by the way?
So motif is a subgraph of the graph. So, and that means that you have a set of proteins that that they interact with each other. For instance, if I know in yeast that is a simple, small network compared to human protein network, if I know this particular part of interactions of protein is responsible for a certain behavior, or sometimes it might be a dysfunction in the cell, or in this species. Then, if I remember correctly, this is a very long time ago, so I don't know how much the field has changed. But the idea was that this subgraph is also you can find similar thing in, let's say, human, and it's responsible for the same thing. So that we wanted to find those.
So quickly find similar structures.
Yeah, exactly. And then back then, so we had a low computation power. So it's interesting, if you read the paper, you see, I was just looking a few weeks ago, that you see we describe the memory used and the CPU used, and how much of the subgraphs we could detect in what size. And you see there is a cap that we couldn't go more than that. It's 12, I think, or something. And if you look at the numbers, it's this is nothing. I can just run it on my computer now.
Really?
Yeah.
But I would like to move further now. And I would like to explore a little bit, what does it mean to be lead AI researcher at King? And there are many angles we can explore here, but what is AI at King, and what does a lead AI researcher do at King?
So my team is named AI R&D. So we are an R&D team within the tech organization at King. And then we have a lot of games, right? So the tech organization is responsible for supporting each of these games, like a startup that you have, right? Then what our team is focused on is in 3 areas. So we work on content generation. We are for instance, content level in Candy Crush is a content, or you can have a lot of different assets that we have in different games are our content. So content generation. Then we have also like user understanding and recommender systems, another area, and then building tools and infrastructure to scale machine learning in the company. The thing is that like a lot of, if you look at the well-established AI companies, most of them, they are, so they have been built with a lot of like, there's a lot of win that you can have with like innovation, and then like you get to a point that you need to scale, and then like you start like looking at like, I want to apply AI. And so it's like, it's different from compared to Spotify. For instance, Spotify has recommender system as part of its core, right? But
harder to add afterwards, maybe.
Yeah, I would say so. But like there's so many elements in gaming that like you can start working and building a successful game before in bringing in AI. So one of our goal is to like scale AI in the company. So companies feel we have been actually, I think like 3 years ago, for instance, we built a bot that helps with playtesting levels in Candy Crush so that it tells you before releasing this level, tells you how difficult this level is. So like you don't want to have like when you have the sequence of the levels that are in Candy Crush Saga progression map, you don't want to have like all continuously easy levels or continuously difficult levels, because either you get bored or you get frustrated, right? So you want to have a good user experience. And we use this bot to give us an estimate of the difficulty of the level before giving it to the user. So that's one piece, like, building AI for development. We do research for long-term things. So like quite exploratory research, for instance, on reinforcement learning to just assess like the potential for future at the company. And then we also spend a lot of time on bringing research to these examples of use cases that I mentioned in product.
So how would this sort of the promise of AI or the value proposition of AI for King, how would that be how would you describe that on a business level to people who are not AI people?
So our vision, I would say, is to enable game development. So it's like building tools that enables a better game development. And the other piece is to improve user experience. Mm-hmm. We believe gaming is like a creative work. And
so this is similar, like Spotify want to, for one, have a great user experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Listening to music, but they also want to help artists.
Exactly.
So you want to do the same, but then have a good user experience, and also developers of games to have a good experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. And thinking more, I mean, for a company like King, of course, analytics is very important, and being able to understand users and do traditional things like user retention, prediction, and things like that. And then AI sometimes can be described differently. Different people, describe this in different ways. But some people at least say it's a difference between what AI should mean and perhaps what analytics or advanced analytics should be. What's your view of that? Do you have any differences in what like analytics and AI mean?
That's one of the difficult questions.
Sorry for that.
May I rephrase it a little bit?
Okay.
Because one of the conversations we've had, which is more maybe, I refer to our discussion with Carl Tomé at Epidemic Sound. He was very clear. I'm a machine learning engineer. I'm not a data scientist. And he even when he presented himself, he sort of positioned himself. I'm not a advanced analytics person, and I'm not a software engineer. So I think that's been one of the moments we have come with several guests, that you can start machine learning engineering without doing analytics and vice versa. So here is a very interesting topic of misconception, probably in some organization or in more traditional organizations.
I think so. If I want to structure my answer, is I have answers in few dimensions. So one is that just looking at my journey, I started as research scientist, computer scientist, research scientist, product data scientist, well, my first title at the Spotify was Advanced Analytics Analyst, which was a strange title, but product data scientist, machine learning engineer, and now AI research lead. So you see, like, I've been going through a lot of different titles.
But can you distinctly see the difference in what you did when you were more on the scientist side or the ML engineer side? As an example?
Yes, and no, and that's where I want to reach. Is like whenever I meet a person and they say any of these titles, even, and also if you include also data engineering, I ask what exactly do you do? So that I get a sense of like this title in this particular company, what it means. I think a lot of companies are moving towards, like, if you want to think of machine learning, to have machine learning engineer title, because it's easier to hire, because people are used to this title this year, maybe not like next year.
This is the new cool title.
I think ML Ops is also a
ML Ops. We have been ML Ops, ML Engineering. That's 2020.
Yeah.
Not 18.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess we can agree that a lot of companies are abusing the terms. What an analyst does and should do, and what AI is and should do, and what a data scientist is, and so forth. Mm-hmm. But if we take the king, and you mentioned a number of examples like content generation or recommender systems or understanding users potentially. And you can think about analytics, which is super important to understand, how the KPIs are moving and, having a good visualization of those, etc. This is a difficult question, but what would you say is the more proper term when to say I'm actually working with AI or not, if we ignore the title of the role, so to speak, for now?
So my team is working on AI, right? So like we also have data scientists and also we have business analysts in the company. I think, so a lot of, it's, I'm trying to formulate it. I would say, so a lot of things that it goes, for instance, on the time that you spend on focusing on KPIs, or like you look at A/B tests that you're running. Those are a lot of analytics work that you need a lot of good. You might need a lot of good statistics knowledge. You might need a lot of a bit of data engineering work, a bit of data visualization work that goes there. But I consider those more of like under analytics part of data science.
Yes, I agree.
But then we also have, like, by the way, like we have also, like, for instance, statisticians that spend on research concepts to bring into improving, like, for instance, how you interpret an A/B test better, right? So that I call it data advanced statistics part. Having said that, I think data scientists' work is also about building predictive models, not just like, doing a data exploration. Looking at AI, I think 80% of the work is actually data science work, data exploration work, and understanding your metrics and and so on. And then 20% of that is like building a model. When it is super applied, I would call that maybe applied AI or applied ML, or applied or engineering ML. When it comes, because you want to bring that to a production.
So you want to deploy, in the end you want to find the right model to deploy it as part of the product or user experience for the customer or for the developer.
Exactly, and you need to think about a lot of things. If we had just a discussion about like distributed deep learning, for instance, you need some knowledge around like how you orchestrate things around that too, right? But there is also a piece that you need to spend a lot of time on finding out what is actually a right model. Why can't I, if I am doing a normal clustering, why every time it returns a different answer, right? So how can I improve that? Or if I'm building a predictive model, how can consider like certain factors, or how can I model, like similar to the work that we did before together back in Spotify, you want to like have a better understanding of your user journey. You set out a whole research agenda that is unclear scope, and you need to figure out that the scope and to establish like machine learning foundations there. I would say it requires a lot of data science and engineering work as well, but the weight of research is higher, and then I call that like ML research work. Yeah.
And ML perhaps is a more clear term. AI is so hard or abused so many times, so it's sometimes a bit hard to understand.
And when we met, I asked you, so what do you do as a ML researcher on a daily basis? So what does that mean?
Well, I attend meetings,
we said that.
Prepare slides.
Yeah. But you had some core. In the end, we came up with a couple of core dimensions of the role.
Yeah. So as a research lead, I spend a lot of time on thinking about and like planning, bringing research to production. So thinking about how can we package our research and scope it in a way that can has positive impact on a product. In this case, our games, for instance. And then the other part is about mentorship and supervision of interns and master students and industrial PhDs.
Yes. You mentioned that you some way had some sort of passion for taking research into product.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate on that?
So I think, especially now, I think this is a trend that I really hope that would be a focus in ML communities in the next couple of years, at least, because there's a lot of resources out there that you can just existing models. There is a lot of people fresh
libraries, frameworks.
Exactly.
Go nuts.
And then fresh graduates from school that maybe their knowledge is sometimes might be more up to date than a lot of people that they are in industry in this field, right? But you sometimes miss these key questions of what am I building this for? Am I optimizing? So if I build a super complex model and then I put it in production, and by the way, this data that you trained your model with, in a streaming data, that doesn't exist, or they are very different, measured differently with a different frequency.
So a theoretical research concept doesn't really fly when you really want to put it in production.
Or you want to have high it's a matter of latency, for instance. And then the other thing is that you optimize for precision and recall, accuracy, and then you put that in production, and the metric that you need to satisfy is user engagement. How do you map, when you are training, try out tons of different models, how do you map the metrics that you have looked
metrics
at to the metric that you want to optimize in production? And then the other part is that very often product people have an idea of what they want to build. Still, there is a lot of iterations that you need to make to translate that to what data, what metrics, what model, what problem. Then you can start looking at things. And I think that's a challenge that I like us to do. And I spend a lot of time and I'm passionate about, especially around metrics.
But I think even going back to, I worked with Vattenfall for several years. And I remember a war story that, the head of strategy, one in the export members, he wanted to talk to me at some kind, and so he gave me sort of 5 minutes. Okay, what's the problem? Why can't we move faster? And thinking on the spot like this, and I basically blurped out, from nowhere. I think it's the business to data and analytics translation, which is the whole problem for us to get started. I mean, the business people in their domain has so little knowledge around what this can be done. So how we translate this into the problem that is solvable with data and AI is number one.
Yeah.
And the more I think about this and the more experienced I have become, I see this more and more. And I think you are now pushing this even further, that this is really tricky. If you really want to do AI in production, because if you really do it all the way down, feature engineering, metric setting, etc., it's huge.
Yeah.
It's really tricky.
I think it comes from different sides as well. It's like, it's very often you have engineering team building something for you. And then I'm like, well, I want to put my model in production, and this engineering infrastructure that you are giving me has zero flexibility for that. So you need an interaction with engineers. Then you also have the product of like, really what's sometimes they come and say, I want to have prediction of X, or can you improve X? And then you need to dig in what actually they mean. Might be like you can do something much simpler. And very often people don't think about the maintenance cost of machine learning models. And you need to think of like, how much maintenance I bring into this team that doesn't have enough knowledge of maintaining a machine learning model. And how much explainability do they need to feel comfortable using that model. I remember in Spotify, I worked on a project that we wanted to shorten the time that we run an A/B test on new users. And we were discussing of like, can we, instead of like looking for a longer term, look at shorter term and predict that. We started looking at very complex, I personally started looking at complex models to start with. And then you start talking with product owners and you realize that, what they actually want is that if I'm going to use this, I need to know if I turn this knob, how much the other thing changes. So they feel comfortable with using this as a decision-making tool. And then we ended up making a much simpler model with my colleague.
Usability was more important than anything else, maybe.
Explainability.
Understandability for the user.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember this very well as well from that time. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes you can think about that project as either a very, high successful outcome or actually a failure in some sense, because we didn't need the ML model to start with. Yeah. But I would say, and let me know what you think about this, but I think it's a very, the best outcome you can almost think about for a machine learning project, because we had a number of features or input signals that we could measure. We didn't know really what affected the target that we had. Yeah. But we needed to model that somehow, used machine learning, could get some kind of feature importance for that. And so, one of them is super strong. Why don't we just remove the rest and just use this one as a single metric? Yeah. And then we didn't need to train a model. We can easily put it in production and we can understand it very, very easily. Yeah. But still, without having taken the step to go through that and measure that with machine learning, we wouldn't have known that in a scientific sense, right?
I totally agree. This is where you need, this is the part I said, you need an ML research where you know how to structure the problem. You look at it, you build a model, you look at the feature importance, you do look at a lot of importance factors. And then... But you also need this mentality of at the end, where am I putting this? So you have the applied ML hat, and then
what do I really need?
Yeah, exactly.
Bottom line, what do I really need to solve this?
Yeah, at the end, I agree. It was in a sense, being so excited as a researcher is a failure, but also I think
from a business perspective, it's beautiful.
It gets out and they are using it. Then I feel also very excited.
But just continuing a bit about new maintenance of ML and people, so many people I think in AI only build prototypes and it never reach production or some product or some use or value for the company in some way. And you have done that a number of times. Well, have you seen this as well? That so many people think just having trained a model and seen that that some accuracy score is enough, and then what's left really? You would say to actually have that integrated in some product or some system? I
think there is one factor that is a much larger. If you prefer, we can talk about it later. And that's the human factor. It's if your decision maker is on board to support you and fund your project, and also sponsoring the project, and also have the openness of trying machine learning. And understand that you can't have a normal, a Jira system that you have daily deliveries and there is a requirement of iteration for machine learning. If you have those pieces in place, that's the most important piece for success of a machine learning.
So elaborate on that. So from I think I understand it, but maybe I didn't understand. There's a difference in the fundamental DevOps process for software engineering to machine learning ops.
Yeah.
So the cycles and how you need to understand the differences to fit them together. Is that what you said? Or please elaborate if I misunderstood.
So this was even before getting to a point that you're building. So yes and no. So the first thing is that you need a team that basically understands, or like a decision maker that understands to set out a longer timeline.
Yes.
And to your point, why this longer timeline is needed, Google has a nice article about actually what is the differences between a traditional software development and like a machine learning development.
Which one? Is that the hidden technical depth thing, or which paper is?
After hidden tech, there is another one. I forgot the name. It actually compares and also shows how you can score machine learning projects.
Okay. So about testing in machine learning.
Something like that. I just don't remember the name.
Okay.
In when you have machine learning, so there's a lot of certainty around software engineering. In machine learning, there is no certainty about, like, for instance, you have a lot of randomness in your data, and you need to like test out for like quality of your data. You need to test about feature importance of your data, and then you need to monitor in a different way, and you also need a lot of extra analysis to understand these uncertainties when you're building your model. So the cycles in terms are different. And then even before getting to this was assuming that you have a model in production, right? But even before that, just the example that Anders and I were discussing, that project, it was not a one-day work. It was like more than one day work. Like even to get like to the first iteration, you get an insight about data. So sometimes data exploration is undersold. People think it's easy, just have a look at data. But that is actually maybe like 2-3 weeks of work for some cases. So that's what I meant. If you get that
if the top management buys into this, number one, to be committed to support and understand that this is a different cycle. Yeah,
but then talking about these last pieces of like taking machine learning to production. In the last project I worked in Spotify, we worked on like cold start problem and like building recommendation system for that. We spent like a month working on defining.
So just to explain to people, cold start basically is when you have very little data about the song or a user, and you want to still be able to recommend that. In some way.
So like user just signs up and you don't know anything about the taste of user, and you want to build still some recommendation to the user. So you want to provide recommendation system on that. I spent I think a month on understanding our data, our model, and like I because I was a data science product before, I had a good understanding of the metrics, and doing a lot of predictive models and feature mapping to figure out how things correlate to each other to define a metric offline that is a good proxy for the online performance. Then I felt more confident that, okay, now I can put this in production and test it, and most likely it's successful.
So why do you want to have it offline and not simply use the online? Obvious question, but still for the people. Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, you don't want to test very bad performing model on your users. I mean, you want to respect user experience. So that's the key piece, right?
And also the cost of
there is
building
a high
A/B tests and products and
exactly. There is a high cost of just you put something in production, you need to build a lot of monitoring system around it and scheduling and there's a high cost of maintaining that model, even if you leave it live for 2 weeks, right? And it needs to have certain standard. We wanted to test our models before. Just in the prototyping phase, before we get to the high quality software standards, to see, okay, this is the right choice, and we go in this path.
Cool. So there is a lot of things to, for one, just, you do data exploration, you perhaps build some prototype, just train the model and trying to see some value from that, but then actually putting in production, then you have a lot of steps to do there, and then you have a lot of maintenance as well, just making sure it continues to work, I guess.
Yeah.
And
I think for maintenance, one thing that people forget is that every single feature that you throw at your model means that you also need to maintain a lot of underlying tables that are actually building that particular that feature comes from. So that means that not only introducing maintenance of your model, introducing maintenance to this particular data and the sequence of all the things that this depends on. So people forget that this is actually a hidden cost to consider.
So not only models, but all the data dependencies and all the data
Exactly.
pipelines and everything. I guess Spotify had like 10,000 pipelines running every day or something. How many do you think King has? It's probably a lot, right?
It's a lot of data. Yeah, I think around same scale. It's just different type of data.
And let's talk a little bit about the difference and how you see the view of. We have talked now going to production, so we can talk about the vertical going to production, like vertical, really not going to insert, but putting it in a system for a user. What about the horizontal scaling, to having many different pipelines or having many different algorithms in place? That's another dimension of scaling, I guess.
That's a good question. I think, so for instance, now in my team, we, like the particular example that I said about playtesting and having a bot for playtesting, we had a bot that was trained by applying supervised learning. So you look at the user data, you train the model to be able to predict, given the current state of the game, what would be the next action, like what choice of matching the user does in Candy. Then we started saying that, okay, if you want to do research, you want to also know how does the random bot performs. Then we started saying that, okay, we want to try out reinforcement learning once. You start like scaling and trying out a lot of different models, and then then while you are trying, like the whole game is moving and advancing. A lot of new content is coming, and then you need to retrain your bot. So you get a lot of these challenges of you need to scale. So you need a lot of automation. So we spent, I think, not like full time, but like we spent like 6 months of time on building infrastructure, where we can plug in a lot of different models. We can scale if the number of game designers that they are using this tool is like it's suddenly increasing. We can scale the number of trials that we have, and we can automate the process of using data from users and the changes of the game. So I think it was the time well spent, because now it makes it much easier for us to iterate on what we do and have a better maintenance.
But then I must ask you, do you and King have a clearly defined use case life cycle? From an idea of what you want to ideate that we should do this, there is a business guy saying, a product owner saying something, it goes into research, ideation, validation. Do you have a clear path?
I wish we get to that clear path. So I think we are still not as mature we don't have as many big use. Like if you get to a company that you have several use cases, like 100 use cases, then you get to this, like you need to establish that. What I have been doing when I joined King was to establishing a research framework where I listed a set of questions where if you want to start a machine learning project, you need to answer those. Where, like, what is your data? What is the business method?
AI canvas.
Exactly. Inspired from AI canvas very much. And like my experience in few companies that I worked in. That highlights where you need to talk to whom and what kind of, in order to start that project, what kind of skill sets you need for that project and when, so that you can set out a project. And we help, like my team helps, if a project is an external thing, helps them, the teams to look at that. But with like if you think about use cases and life cycle, again, like we don't have as mature cycles, but usually it needs to come from, if it doesn't come from our team, an idea, proof of concept that we showcase, it should come from a need of the business. Mm-hmm. And usually there is some data science work that has happened around it. So there's insights about data, how much of an opportunity is, why we think machine learning can have impact. Then we have two formats. One is that we do a consulting. So data scientists in game teams, they work on machine learning projects, and we support them in terms of like, research, and they look at data and so on. Another one is that we start building something in my team, which we know that it's more complex and it takes longer period.
I think that's a very important question, and this is more about the organization of how to have data science teams and AI teams, etc. And I know we tried a number of things in Spotify for that, and you now have like an AI team, and you can think about pros and cons of having a central team, perhaps being a bit disconnected to the product, but still you have the critical mass to actually have some really productive type of people. And then you can have consultants, as you said, that actually help product teams. What do you think the best way to do this is? Should data scientists be embedded in product teams? Should they have a central team? How should you do it?
I think this is like a very important topic close to my heart, because it's an unsolved problem, I would say. Depends on the size of the company. So in smaller companies, in smaller startups, you probably look for a different recipe than like a larger companies. I think the key factor is what you said, the critical mass. So if you need a critical mass for each of them to work, but I would go for a hybrid, because I think it's important to have a longer investment. So you need a research component that is more focused, but also I think research should not be very disjoint from product. So I don't remember which company, but one of these big companies, what they do is that when you join a company, they send you to product teams. And then you are resident there for a month. You shadow people, you learn about like a lot of things, you learn about metrics, their challenges, and then you go back to your team. Right. So a hybrid system, I think, is good. Where an example is that like if you have people that they can come to as an incubator, join to the research if they want to do more research, or like a research. You mean
going from product to research, or vice versa?
Both.
So having a good interaction.
Yeah.
Good.
But for any of these work, you need a critical mass, right? So that's why I say it's a hard thing to solve.
But we have talked about this and explored the organizational topic. If I'm relating back to the work I've been doing the last 4 or 5 years, first with Vattenfall and now on consultant basis with Scania, Grundfos. So this is in a more industrial setting, and coming from a company which has a traditional analog business, right? And there is clearly a data literacy issue here. We actually talk a lot more about orchestration than organization. And what I mean with orchestration is the fundamentals of, if I look at the use case lifecycle and I truly understand where's the business value, who owns the P&L, and in my case, who owns the people that's supposed to adopt data-driven decision-making and stuff like this. It's like one business value stream from ideation to production to operations. And then we talk about the core technology side, which we split up in the data science part and also the operations. And then we have, of course, a quite huge stream, which is simply data management, data governance, GDPR. So this whole orchestration piece, what about this? How do you do that? I think this is more important even than organization.
I think Gradient Descent company has done a good job on putting together something called maturity index, AI maturity index, which is I think when you start looking at starting like AI orchestration in a company, you need to first map out in all of these dimensions that you mentioned, like, you know, data, people, business, infra, where you are, so that like you have a score on each dimension and you know where you are, and then you can start planning and figuring out how you can solve it. I think in my case, I've had the luxury of working with data-driven people. Sometimes probably
companies, data-driven companies, I would even say.
But I've also seen, if you move from, like, for instance, when I worked in Spotify, if you move from one org to another, one org is super data-driven, the other one is not. And then you see a huge difference of, like, the adoption or, like, you know, possibilities of, like, even, like, how that affects infrastructure work and so on and so on. So, but still, like, I had the luxury of working in the companies that they want to be data-driven.
Well, speaking about these two companies then a bit, you have had the luxury or have the luxury to work at two of the top Swedish tech companies. And still, you know, if you were to try to compare them, what do you think the differences between Spotify and King are?
Difficult question to compare.
Good question.
I think it depends. I mean, if you think about data or you think about like products or like culture, you see like different angles, right?
Yeah.
And I think they are both like rather large companies. I would say like King is probably larger in Stockholm than like other locations, while Spotify is probably more internationally spread. And that brings like some differences, like meetings, for instance, how many virtual meetings you have versus like in-person meetings.
Which one would you say is the higher number of meetings?
Virtual meetings is Spotify, definitely, because I had, for instance, half of my team in sitting in New York and half of my team sitting in Stockholm. But the Spotify, but King has been more like, you know, I've usually have meetings within Stockholm, sometimes meeting with London or Berlin, or Barcelona, but it's way much less. So your focus is more on the site. Thinking about data, I would say King is probably have been a lot focused on building a good infrastructure for A/B testing and automation of a lot of data science work that you do. So there's a lot of libraries and packages that is like, oh, this makes my life super easy. I think Spotify has a really good infrastructure, data infrastructure team. And then when it comes to research, then of course, like Spotify has way much larger org for research, but I'm hoping that at King we can get there too.
With your help, you'll get there, right? But speaking about research, some people, or how would you describe the difference between a research team and a product team?
I think we touched a bit on that, that the cycle of work is very different. I remember once I was in a product team or even an engineering team once, and you want to tell them that, listen, I can't put a Jira ticket and say that like I check mark this one like in one day.
Yeah, Scrum time boxes.
Yeah, Scrum. Yeah. So you get a lot of, especially if you're more junior, you get a lot of anxiety of why am I not delivering while others are delivering. But I mean, to be a bit more serious, I think the pace is different, and like the stress of like delivery and the business request affects a lot of of decision makings and priorities, and also I think research teams probably spend less time on product quality work. So sometimes, depending on how they are formulated, like in our case, we have a whole infrastructure as our focus, but that means that like there is also like sometimes there is a technical depth that like you have.
Which one is the larger? Obvious kind of question, but still.
The technical depth, I mean, depends. If you think about a product team that has a strong engineering backbone, obviously they have a less technical depth.
Yeah.
But in research team, you have a high technical depth.
Yeah.
But sometimes also if you go to a company where product team is just patching and they have a fast delivery and they are stressed with like delivering something, they might actually do a lot of duct taping, which will break when you want to scale something. While research might think of, if you have like infrastructure thinking, you might actually think that through in a better pace.
Actually, we are mentioning now infrastructure and how we do things, and actually for a traditional company, it's a little bit like looking from the outside at some sort of future world out there. What is the infrastructure of the core tech companies, and maybe even contrasting Spotify's infra and King's? So really let us be a little bit concrete now, because if you go to a place like Vattenfall and Scania, which has a huge infrastructure, which is a legacy, all technical depth in one way, and we are trying to figure out how to deal with SLAs of 2,000 systems, right? That now should fit into a platform. So we are all challenged and struggling to understand what is this infra. So could you tell us a little bit about what we are talking about concretely here?
I think probably Anders can talk a lot about Hadoop back in Spotify.
May I please?
No, but let's start with King, I think. What's the fundamental stack
I
in
think,
King?
so both King and Spotify are using Google Cloud as infrastructure. Spotify moved probably much earlier, not much earlier, but like a couple of years earlier than Spotify, than King.
That's the cloud infrastructure.
That's the cloud infrastructure.
So what do you actually use there and compared to all the open source and everything else?
I think but that's also part of cloud infrastructure, right? So like,
if you do it, it's good.
We use BigQuery, but also I'm just trying. Like for instance, we use quite intensively also Kubernetes. I guess it's the same at the Spotify now.
And now you can use Kubernetes in different ways. You can do it more natively, or you can do it completely open source, or even more packages.
But then I think programming language, I think both companies have freedom for data scientists to use Python and R, but I think people use mostly Python. So
Julia is not really kosher yet. We have had some Julia fans on the show.
Yeah, I know, but I think at least to the best of my knowledge, at least until 2 years ago that I was in a Spotify, it was not.
But Python is the dominant language.
I mean, it's different in a research team and a product team, of course. I mean,
exactly.
you need to have much stricter like requirements, of course, if something is in production.
Exactly. Like the moment that you want other people be able to read your code and maintain your code, and then like have like unit tests that you can test things, you get to. I would use Python. I don't even use R there. If I want to do fast hack, maybe yes, for statistics, R is really good. But again, I'm not expert in R, so I have a biased view here.
So you're a
Same
Python.
for Julie.
You live in Python?
Yeah, or
TensorFlow. TensorFlow?
Yeah, Python. Python probably more than TensorFlow, because you do more data analysis than
exactly.
spending the proportion of time that you spend.
So if we needed to define you by the programming language, who are you? You're a Python girl.
Probably I should say TensorFlow.
You should say that.
Yeah, I would. Well, you asked me what's my day today, and I said meeting. But would I define myself as like a meeting person? No, I would define myself as a research person. Perfect. So it's the same goes with Python and TensorFlow. So if I
good
think
answer.
about
very good answer.
Yeah.
So speaking about TensorFlow and just digging a bit deeper into that, what do you think about the 2.0 release? And if you compare it to PyTorch, is it and the eager execution and everything?
So PyTorch, I've coded only like maybe a couple of times there. So I'm like at zero level of expertise and opinion. The same goes for TensorFlow 2.0. But I think what I can compare is like Keras and TensorFlow 2.0 because I think they kind of look the same. I think we had our libraries, for instance, in TensorFlow 1.x. We just moved them to TensorFlow 2.0, and like we have been like testing recently of like what differences we see. Of course, we had to spend some time on doing the adaptation, but also meant a lot of like performance things are fixed. Like code optimization, distributed work is much easier, and like it's also more readable, I would say, and easier for testing. So, yeah,
moving in the right direction at least.
I would say so. But again, like if I want to say myself being hands-on, I haven't been as much on TensorFlow 2.0. So it's a lot of like pairing up and like reviewing or like second-hand information from my team. Yeah.
And what is the biggest frustration in the tech stack or where we are right now? Where is it like? Can't they figure out how to do? What is it that sort of you think is what they really should aim for to do better? Where is the tech going? Where's this going? What do we need to do better?
I think. Okay, so you can look at it from different perspectives. One is like open source, right? And like contributing to open source things. So that's one side of thing to look at that I would like to see tech going towards. Day-to-day work, what is more, I think it's just there's so many of them. And then like you get to a point that you need to decide, and then like this all of a sudden is changing, and then you need to adapt to another new package, or your team is deciding on something and while another team is deciding something else, and how do you do like the common language, I would say.
And how do you steer that in King? Do you care, or do you try to have a standard or bodies do you have like guilds and chapters and stuff like that to try to figure this out together? So
I think guilds and chapters are much stronger at Spotify, because the organizational aspect is very different. So at Spotify you have horizontal and vertical, in a sense that you have in each organization or like a mission or a tribe. You have engineering, you have product, you have designers, you have iOS developers.
To solve the tribe should solve their purpose.
Exactly. So this cross-functional thing moves all the way from like the top to the bottom. Everywhere you see cross-functional until like the smaller team are also cross-functional, right? At King, you have a lot of games, right? And each game is like its own company.
It's a company within the company. It's a P&L within the company.
Yes. So, and that company has these cross-functional teams, but then you also have this tech organization that is supporting all of these things.
Cross-infra, for instance.
And the shared tech org is basically picking up the pieces that is common between like SDKs that are common between all of different games and is maintained by them. Or like, we have some platforms like unified platforms that like all of the tools that are provided are within that. But I would say I have like not enough knowledge to go through the details of those, but and the reason is like the nature of my team and my work, which is we have a lot of flexibility while we build tools and test our ideas, and then we need to figure out how to map this to a product.
Yeah, and so this is fascinating, and especially if you're not working in some of these companies, it is a different world, and it's very, very nice to peek a little bit how it looks.
So the time is really flying away here, and we've spoken quite a lot about King now and about you, and we have a number of other topics that you have worked with that I'd love to cover as well. But just a final point, because I think what you're doing right now in trying to accelerate research or innovative thinking in King, how would you recommend a company that feels a bit, they're just focusing on the coming 2-3 months and doesn't really have the innovative thinking in a proper way? What's the best way for a company to get started having this type of thinking?
Depends on the size of the company that we are talking about.
So a couple of 100 people, perhaps?
I think the most important thing is that the C-level and the VPs are on board, committed to take this, because you hit the wall of sponsorship, you hit the wall of time investment. So after 3 months, if your team doesn't deliver, will you still keep the team? Do you see the value or not? So I would say some trainings for
and
that level.
If a C-level
needs to be.
If a C-level people come and speak to you, why? How would you describe to that C-level person why research is important?
So I think, again, I look at which function of C-level we are talking about. Talking to a CTO would be very different to talking to a CPO, right? So you make some assumptions on the background. I think it's a matter of if you, for instance, if you are, when I started learning how to drive, my dad was telling me that if you are driving and you just look at 2 meters front of you, there's a high chance of having an accident. While the key to success is to look far. So if you want to keep yourself between the lanes, just look far. And that's, I think, the message, right?
Good analogy.
Good message.
So
if you want to go in the right direction, you actually need to look further to keep the car in the lane. That's a really good analogy.
And the other thing is that I think it's a matter of a bit demystifying AI, because a lot of C-levels might come and VPs come and say that, hey, I've heard this cool thing. Why don't we have that in our product? It's okay, hold on a minute. So let's have a chat. So helping them to demystify what AI can do and what AI cannot do is another thing that I would spend time on.
I like that. Cool. I think one very interesting thing is RoboCup, which I know you have been involved with quite a lot.
And you've been too.
And now what is this?
With you, not with RoboCup with you.
I heard RoboCup, but it's RoboCup.
Yes. So I remember my first meeting, I think it was in 2001 or something. I was in Ichkai conference somewhere, and they had the RoboCup.
So what is it? You need to frame it a little bit, I think.
Perhaps you can do it better. Otherwise, how would you describe RoboCup?
So RoboCup goal is, the symbolic goal is by the year, now I forgot if it's 2025 or 2050. 2050, I think, yeah. To have a team of robots that can play football versus human. And that's a symbolic goal. It consists, to achieve that goal, it consists of a lot of different leagues. So you have simulation league, 2D, 3D, you have middle-sized robots, you have small-sized robots, you have humanoid robots, and so some of the leagues are focused on, let's say you have a now humanoid robot that you need to deal with the mechanics and the vision. So for the research, right, to balance, and they play football against each other. When it comes to middle size and a small size, it's a lot of computer vision and some decision making and collaboration between the players. And then you get to simulation, where you have in 2D you have, and I come from the simulation, by the way. You have team of 11 versus 11, or you have a simulated 3D agents that are a smaller number of agents. And this is where you can have more complicated algorithms without worrying about the mechanics and computer vision side.
And it's a big difference between simulation and the not simulation.
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's so cute to look at some of the
I don't
videos,
really
by the way.
paint the picture. So what is it that I look at? How does it work when you do the simulation? What is it actually all about?
So it's distributed AI domain. So the thing is that you are actually developing one agent.
And what is an agent in the field of the
So
simulation?
let's say a player. So you have a simulated player, and this player looks at the position of the field and where the other players they are, and should choose whether to pass, do a dribble, or to shoot, right? And or to position if the
move position to
which position to stay waiting for a ball or to intercept it, right? And so you don't tell to the agent go here, and go here. That would be not like a distributed AI. Here you have an autonomous agent that can decide independently, and like they can play together. So that's the complexity that we bring in.
So, and what is the definition of distributed in this context? Several agents, several players.
Exactly.
So you have several players that should make decisions in interaction with the rest.
So they observe. So you have an observation, sense the environment, think, act, right? So each agent does like observe the environment, thinks what is the right thing to do, and makes an action. And this group of agents are collaborating together to reach a goal, which is like winning against the other team.
Scoring a goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Football.
Yeah.
And what's the what's the biggest complication in all this?
So I was in. So I participated. My first RoboCup was in 2004, and I was working in RoboCup until 2010. So participants, organizer, and like executive.
So fun. So much fun.
And it has changed quite a bit, like since I left. But I think, the biggest challenge depends. I mean, you have a limited, like for instance, you might also introduce some constraints of limited vision. The limited stamina, those also becomes a challenge, or like introducing a coach could be also a challenge. I think the most complex thing is I don't know. I mean, it's the whole challenge. All of it is together a challenge. Like you have basic skills, and it's the decision making. Like when is the right time, given the whole configuration and like the other agents, when is the right time to do what?
And how does it work? How much do you work at home preparing for the cup? And how is this like a hackathon where this is all happening?
So it's a week of event. So like you have like conferences. So of course you have to submit at this again. Like it's my knowledge might be a bit outdated. So you have to submit a team description. It's like a paper saying what you have done, what are like the solutions that you're using.
So you come with a team to compete.
Yes. So we were a team of 8.
So you need to train your team before they show up. I love it.
So you write a team description. You also send a binary of your like exec of your team, and then that would be run on the actual simulation environment on like the winner of last year, for instance. And then like they look at how your team performs, and from the organizing committee chooses the team.
So there's like the qualifier to get into the finals.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
And then there's also a limit on teams per country, so that you have a more diverse from different continents and countries. During the competition, so then you spend time after you're qualified, prepare your team, and then you have like the same as football. So you have like a split. You submit
different groups.
Exactly. And every day you submit your binary, and then like they play. The day after you go to the next round, so you might want to do some improvements.
So you can coach your team in between. Yeah, you can learn. This team is really good at this. I need to tweak the code here.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's so fun. It's like it's funny that because you look at the screen and you see your agent and start like shouting, but you're not in a stadium, right? But
I bet you should have T-shirts and you should have the.
Yeah. But talking about like research in that domain, like a lot of work in reinforcement learning. If you talk to the community in RoboCup, you see that they've done a lot of work in reinforcement learning, and now it's becoming a hot topic, or like neural network. It's become a very hot topic, and that has been there for a long period, and it's so nice to be part of that community.
And what's your involvement in RoboCup?
Yeah, well, a lot of history there, but I think one interesting comment, if you go back to Kasparov, when he beat Deep Blue back in '97, he basically said this thing, I can feel it, I can smell it, it's a new kind of intelligence across the board. And he knew very well how the Deep Blue algorithm software worked. It's searching a big tree and trying to find the best move forward. And it seems simplistic, but when it all comes together, it's emerging some kind of intelligence in some way. Yeah. And when you competed and you wrote and understood exactly how the software worked, could you sometime be surprised with how the team that played actually worked? Or
I think because there is a dynamic there, and that's like the other team, right? So it's hard. Sometimes you get also surprised. You have a certainty of like, if you spend enough time to train your agent and watch it, like how it performs, you have a certain expectation and you know how it works. But the dynamic factor from the other team might surprise you sometimes. But there is, I don't know. I mean, there is a surprise and not surprise.
Yeah. I was very surprised. I remember in 2001 when I saw the Simulation League, and there were like a number of universities in the US and other countries that competed, and it was one university that was so extremely dominating everyone else, and the only thing everyone has to reprogram when they met this university and said we have to play as defensive as we can so we don't shame ourselves too much and lose with too much points. And I think they only lost with 11-0, and that was actually a good thing because the other one was so good.
We got the third place award.
All right.
In the 3D competition, the first year of 3D competitions.
Yeah. Which year was that?
2004.
And what was it? And what the team? How were you working on it? A couple of people together in your research group?
So we were 8 people. Half of us were working mostly focused on the 2D. And half of us, 4 of us, we were working on the 3D. Yeah, and that was, we were bachelor students back then.
Good fun.
Yeah, it was.
And speaking about the vision then, do you think the robot champion in 2050 will beat the human champion in soccer?
Well, I'm not sure about, but okay, I have to say one thing. So I played, by the way, in one. So there is every time that there's the event, there is also this symbolic match where like trustees of RoboCup that they're like more senior in the field, they play versus robots.
Humanoids, you mean?
Not humanoids.
You mean that you take an agent and have someone you can control each?
So there's a league called Middle Size, and they are this size robots, and they have 3 wheels. They are like a pyramid, and they run very fast. And you have a big field that they compete, and they also can throw the ball 3 dimensions. And then like you have trustees, like 3 versus 3, for instance, or I don't remember how many, but like you have smaller than 11 that playing in the field. So once back I was in Iran, and like there was a local event in Iran, and I got into playing against those, and it was super scary because you don't want to hold the ball when they are running if you feel like I'm not sure if this will really stop. So I think there is a chance, but I mean, it's hard to say. I think we get there's a lot of work that has been now in humanoid domain.
But still extremely rudimentary, right?
Yeah, but we're talking about 30 years. So I guess like 30 years is a good amount of time if you look at the trajectory of what has been achieved in the past 10 years.
But I think, a lot of people don't understand the challenges with robotics as a technique, and if you compare this just, having to develop the software and using AI for that, and then suddenly controlling some kind of physical robot, which is extremely underperforming today, right?
I think there's a lot of factor there. So talking about taking research to product,
exactly.
I think this goes to the same direction. You assume your data has no noise, and then you build something, and in simulation it's much easier, right? The moment that you have just a noise because one of the motors of a joint of the robot is not working properly, then how would you balance that? That becomes a challenge. And there's so much noise on image processing of the agents that factors in. Also, it's how soft is the grass, the artificial grass, and if you change the softness, it can totally affect the balance of the bot. So,
and the lighting and
the light condition, exactly.
So many things. It's fun to see one of the small size leagues, or these kind of Sony iBot robots, the dog kind of robots that they had. It was so fun to see them because they used the tail like a debug signal, so you can actually move the tail as well with the software, and then you can use it to see if the robot agent dog is feeling confused or not. And I know one team, they basically programmed the tail to do a certain thing when they felt confused. And you can see the robots moving about, and then a lot of them raise the tail and they're confused. And I think it really makes you this kind of notion of anthropomorphization, when we actually try to attribute some kind of human-like character to even robots, it's really strong, right? Yeah. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But, I mean, if I want to go back to the question you asked about 2050 and the symbolic goal, I would probably rather not to answer the question, because I would rather focus on how much we can achieve during these 30 years by having these good platforms of research.
Right.
And I think that's the best you can get out of these platforms.
I'd like to have a prediction from you as well, though. That would be even fun.
I want to move in a slightly different direction where we have talked about, but I would like to talk a little bit about the talent and the people aspects of data and AI, and moving even also into the adoption. How to get people to adopt it. So, but let's start from a talent perspective. How should we think about attracting, retaining talent? How should we think about career patterns? Career ladders, or whatever we should call it in this field.
There's so many things.
So, but let's start from. So I give a quite wide open field, and please take us away in the direction.
I think we can think about how we do talent retention in Sweden.
Yes.
We can think about how we actually define talent in companies. We can think about what actually in this field mean to join and change, go from a software engineer to AI, or move around and
change jobs
and so on. And then we can also think about what does career path
is
means in this domain, because it's very different, in my opinion, from software engineering.
But here maybe we should take them a little bit step by step. Which order is the best to go into the topic, do you think?
I don't know.
So what is talent? Let's start here. Do we have a good definition of talent?
I think...
Recruit for talent, not for competence, is one statement I've heard.
Yeah, I think... So, I've been talking about myself. I've been moving around quite a lot in different companies, and that meant also I've gone through interviews in different companies, and probably now that I'm more senior, I have this privilege to choose. While when you are junior, you don't have that much privilege, but you get a sense of, during the interview, what this team is looking for. You get a sense of the type of questions they ask you, what they look for. And I think a lot of companies, they tend to have questions. So I'm not, okay, so let me go one step back. I'm not talking about like big companies like Google, because it's so large that you need to have some processes around like, interviews and like filtering candidates. But I'm talking about like, reasonable sizes in Sweden more. So a lot of companies, they give either assignments or like do a filtering of tech filtering that is very specific. So like
fact-oriented, or what do you mean?
No, they give you a very specific task that if you happen to work in exactly this field, you nail it, right?
So
but
for instance, as a data scientist, you work with SQL quite a lot. And then and statistics. So you can ask fundamental questions in statistics or go to like a very recent thing or like, a very super complex SQL to just, and you lose the person in that like, filtering. The filtering should be really filtering. Does the person knows the basics? And then I think it should be, the next step should be like, like when I'm interviewing, for instance, I'm looking at, can this person explain something that they really know well? Can this person explain something that the person doesn't feel super comfortable about or like confident about? And if we come up with a new topic that this person doesn't know during the discussion, how does the person reason about? And then I get a sense of, I want to invest time, because it's also my time investment, right? I want to invest time to bring in this person, and I think this is like a really good talent for my team, and that I call a talent.
Yes, and this is, I think, a key topic now, recruit for talent and not competence, because this test is really set up to measure competence in just what happened to be that test. It's not a really good metric for talent.
Well, I mean, I think so. Of course, I want to have like, check marks of the person knows like
baseline
very basic
competence. Yeah, so,
exactly.
So there is a baseline clear.
Yeah, and then also if the person has like analytics, reasoning skills, then.
But what other talent? I mean, like coding skills to me, to be a successful ML engineer in a context of putting things in production, is it even 10-20%? I'm just exaggerating here. What about persuasion, explanation? Taking people, working in a team. There's so many other things here.
I think you need to think about like if you're talking about a junior again, or I'm like a more senior person.
Yes, of course.
Or a more senior person, I expect the person to be able to mentor, convey the message, be able to connect the dots to the product. So even if it's like, just like you would be a machine learning engineer that it does continuously coding, I want to see the person can see the big picture, right? But I think you still need some knowledge of like your field. So like the coding, I would say, is there. So
there's clearly a baseline. Of course,
there is clearly a baseline that you need. The problem that I see currently is that this baseline is not right. So, like for instance, like especially you have seen probably this circulated in like LinkedIn probably, that like 15 years of experience in machine learning development. This field is not even like deployment of machine learning is not even 15 years, right? So, and you'd expect that from a junior. So the adjustment doesn't exist there. So it should be like a reasonable baseline, and you evaluate for that baseline.
And you highlighted another thing here is also that the most modern techniques right now could possibly come up from the juniors who just been happen to work in the last versions. While if I go into a bigger traditional company, I can tell you they have been stuck in older versions, and they are maybe from an infra perspective very, very limited to what they really should be working on.
So
they haven't deployed open source at all.
Yeah, and I think there's, again, like if you have the luxury of time, so and you want to pick the right people in your team, like for instance, we have hired a few ML engineers or AI engineers recently, and we had a lot of discussions in my team of like what profile do we look at, and then we started looking at what is the current state of the team, what is the need, what kind of skill sets we have currently in the team. So sometimes the hiring has been more focused on we need someone who is more hands-on on engineering side.
Fitting this.
Yeah, so and then we start adjusting the whole process of looking at the engineering. And then sometimes it's that I need someone who is like really good at research. So that's, if you have the luxury of time, that would be really good to think about on what percent should be the coding, what percent should be the research. But I would say analytics and basics should be there, definitely.
Yeah. And who writes a good job advert? Who should do the recruitment?
GPT-3, right?
GPT-3, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean... Yeah.
Is it you? I mean, like, so I'm asking this directly from a traditional company point of view. You can almost read it in the job advert that they're trying, but they don't really know what this is all about. And this actually sends a lot of signals to the applicant of the maturity.
I think there is a lot of, even if you're like, you know, you have spent a lot of time being both sides of the table, being hired or hiring, there's still a lot of iterations that you need to do in order to get a good ads out, because things like the whole dynamic of like role definitions and expectations of people and what your team needs. So I'm not saying that like, you know, like we are putting the best ads out, but I would say it makes sense for the team or the hiring, like the people actually work with the person, be involved.
Yes.
So, and then also iterate that with HR.
Yes.
So because HR sometimes has really good points of like, you know, maybe you need to structure that is clear enough for people. But yeah, so.
Good points.
Cool. And in the last couple of minutes, perhaps some additional topics that we may be able to cover very briefly at least. But
I want to make sure we get to the career path dimension of HR talent. Could we do that first?
Yeah, sure.
Because this one, I think, is a quite interesting topic. What is the different career path in machine learning and AI? And what's your thoughts here? I
think, I mentioned that this is different a bit between like ML and maybe like software engineering. The thing is that if you think about industrialization, it has a long history. And then you have like, you know, the blue collars and like white collars and so on. There has been like a structured way. You get to a job, you advance your job, and then you become a manager. And then like you become like a more senior manager and you continue, and then you own a company or you become a CEO. And then like things become more and more complex. Then you also need like people staying in the individual contributor track. But the career path is not as clear compared to management. So like, you know, especially like when you get to data and machine learning, you have so many dimensions of like where you can focus on that like even your manager might get confused of like how to assess that you are senior enough to move. So it's so sometimes it's like as a data scientist, it's so frustrating to find, or machine learning engineer, it's so frustrating to find out what are you getting measured against, and then what is the alternative than being a manager. I think there's this like I think like there's like this third pillar of like, you know, you also need tech leads, or you also need machine learning product managers as well that are missing in those career steps. And I would like to see that is like, you know, becoming more into the career steps.
Right. And this whole HR map and what is really HR and what they should do and contribute in order for us to become data and AI ready. It is a quite massive task where they have a quite huge steep learning curve to do, from the simplest to support in job description. I mean, like we can't even talk about it ourselves, defining what is different. Going into training and competencies for the experts to the data literacy, and then now coming into career ladder and also FTE balancing. You know, how many of each role do I need for a balanced team? Is it 2 engineers and 1 data scientist, or vice versa? I don't know. HR doesn't know for sure. Yeah. So there's a huge topic here.
Yeah.
I mean, I like what you say about like ML and AI is sort of becoming like an integral or like a ubiquitous part of any kind of role, including like product managers or whatnot. They should have a core understanding or even specific, paths to make sure that that's like a normal part of your job anyway.
I think you're onto something here, because you can find the third path here, that where you come product owner for an AI intensive service. That's exactly a cool job.
Cool. So not very many minutes left, but I'm a bit struggling about choose which topic to choose here. But I think I would like to hear a bit about research in AI, and especially about how the conferences work, how the reviewing works, and having the kind of preprints that we have on archive today. Will there be? Let me start to make this very quick. Let me start with a controversial question. Do you think like archive will take over more and more, and like big conferences will reduce in importance in the future?
I'm not sure. I think there comes some pros and cons with archive. So it's really good to see there are more work that is getting out there, especially like if you think about big conferences like in machine learning, the acceptance rate are like 18%, 20%, 10%. And then if you think about the number of submitted, is every year, if you look at like the trends, every year the number of submitted work keeps increasing. So that means that your work that is really good might have had a lot of chance like 5 years ago, because there were less number of like submitted papers, but this year you are competing. It's not about the quality necessarily only. Of course, there is a filtering, but it's not necessarily, if you are rejected in a conference, it doesn't mean that it's not a good quality work. It's just, it's not in that 10%. And then there's also whole discussion about whether like the reviews are set out correctly. So it's good that you get a lot of work out there that you can use, but then it's also hard to measure the quality. So how do you know this work is actually reproducible? How do you know the foundation is like, making sense? I would like to see, sorry.
No.
I would like to probably see like a pool that people can like be reviewers there, both from industry and from academia, because very often it's like you go to a conference, it's applied machine learning, and you don't have anyone from industry to evaluate whether this is a good one, right? So to get a pool of reviewers, and then like people can subscribe, you can verify the quality of the reviewers, and then like you can get help from them to sometimes to get a review of the work, even if it goes to archive, not necessarily to a conference. And then you say this has this badge of acceptance.
So for me, who doesn't know, what is archive versus of conferences? I understand, but what does it mean?
Well, archive is, how long ago was archive?
I think it's 20 years now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a portal where you have like you can submit your paper within the domain of computer science, and then you can't and others, but it's much more like
it started in computer science.
It started in computer science, and you can't just like upload something in archive. You also need someone who has been like an archive authored a paper in archive, or at least a few papers in archive, that recommends or refers you to upload
so there are some mechanisms to there is a reviewing process in some
There is
way.
a big problem, of course, with the conferences. It takes a really long time to get into top conferences, and then the whole development and research in AI goes so much faster. Than that.
So much work being done, by the way.
Yeah. And then they also have the whole, I'm not sure if you heard about Jeffrey Howard, he's the founder of Fast AI and previous president of Kaggle, and he said in a Lex Friedman podcast, I believe, the research in deep learning today is mainly a complete waste of time, and partly referring to like it's a lot of companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon of the world that competes in getting the top of the leaderboard of some score for some academic data set that they want to perform on. But that's not really the problem of the industry. That's not really the problems that companies that want to really make use of AI face.
Yeah.
And there's so much lacking research in that other field. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of value of like doing research in machine learning, deep learning. But I agree. I mean, a very good example.
I don't think he said, it's not useful to do research in deep learning. He just said the type of research done today is potentially.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree in a sense, because the very good example I can bring is from gaming. So let's say you have DeepMind solution to beat
AlphaGo.
Yeah, so to beat Go, like Lee Sedol at Go, in Go, and then is that a bot that I want to use in like product development testing? No, I want a bot that can do human-like play testing, because I want to know if this is like inequality that I can present it to my player. So the type of algorithm you need is totally changing, right? Yeah. So in that sense, I think there is a huge gap, and that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, I think the research that is happening in academia, that is a bit like on sandbox, is also valuable for industry to pick up. You don't have in industry a lot of bandwidth of doing crazy exploratory work, right. So you can spend a percentage of that, and it's good to be able to do that together by academia.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. I think we should start to round off, even though I have a long backlog here of other things.
And I was looking at my watch and I was, what happened now? 2 hours?
But Sahar, it's been a true pleasure to have you here, of course. What's happening next in your life?
I think there's so much that I feel like I've been missing that I need to pick up. So a bit, spend more time hands-on.
TensorFlow 2.0.
Yeah. I think I like to grow my team and to expand the work that we do in research. So there are two things that is like my passion that we discussed here. So one is being able to bring research into products responsibly. So looking at AI, responsible AI is a topic
topic I wish we had time to discuss. But
I want to spend more time on and maybe start writing something.
I think you can steal 5 minutes. It's a good one.
And then I think it's also about women in data science. Right. So that's where the two areas that I would like to continue.
And I really admire the work you're doing there, because it's something we dearly need. And
you really need it, and because it will be better, for sure.
Yeah, I hope so.
No, for sure.
I know so. So, cool. And if you were to suggest someone that you would like to actually listen to on this podcast, who would you like to come here or listen to on this podcast?
That was a difficult one. From Sweden.
Probably is. Yeah, that's easier, but
makes it easier to get them here. But but go, feel free, go nuts.
I think so. There are two people. So one is Galina Shubina, because I think she's doing amazing work on maturity of AI. So for Sweden. If I want to think internationally, I would love to see Timnit Gebru here.
Okay.
Timnit is one of the frontiers of responsible AI and interpretable AI. So I would really love to see her getting featured here.
Is she in Europe or where?
US.
US, okay. Yeah. Great, yeah.
Maybe we can do a roadshow, take the whole thing, set it up in LA for a month.
Yeah, so with COVID, if you want to do it in person, I don't know, how much feasible that is, but yeah.
Cool, awesome. Thanks again, Sahar. It's a true pleasure, and I hope we can continue some of the discussions we hadn't time for.
Yeah. So that's the fortunate thing of being here. Now we can continue with the topics we missed.
Yeah, it's thanks for having me here, and it was really fun conversation, and I think we can continue having further discussions around those.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.